There's a narrow waterway on our planet so important that if it closed, it could bring Europe to its knees overnight. For generations, it's been feared, whispered about, and given a name that captures the danger that surrounds it: the Gate of Tears. It's a tiny strip of water separating Africa from the Arabian Peninsula, and right now, it is the stage for a conflict that has taken the global economy hostage. Since late 2023, this choke point has become the epicenter of a storm of missile strikes, drone attacks, and naval showdowns. If this gate closes, the entire continent's energy supply, its manufacturing hubs, and its entire economic stability face an immediate and catastrophic threat. This is the Bab el Mandeb Strait, and the crisis unfolding here could decide Europe's future. Welcome to Empire Secrets. To understand why this narrow stretch of water holds such extraordinary power, you have to start with its geography. The Bab el Mandeb, which is Arabic for the Gate of Tears, is just about 30 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. It funnels all maritime traffic coming from the Indian Ocean into the Red Sea. But its real power lies in what's at the other end of that sea, the Suez Canal. Think of it as a two-part system. The Suez Canal is the famous gateway between Europe and Asia, but the Bab el Mandeb is the only door to that gateway from the south. One can't function without the other. For a ship traveling from a factory in China to a port in Germany, this route is the only one that makes economic sense. The amount of traffic flowing through is staggering. Between 10% and 12% of all global seaborne trade passes through this strait every year. That means for every 10 ships sailing the world's oceans, at least one is heading through this tiny gap. It's not just t-shirts and TVs, the strait is a global energy superhighway. Before the recent crisis, about 8.6 million barrels of oil passed through it every single day, along with about 8% of the world's liquefied natural gas. And that's not just a statistic, that's the lifeblood of industries and the energy that heats millions of homes. Historically, the name Gate of Tears came from the dangerous currents and rocks that made sailing treacherous. Today, the tears are economic and geopolitical. The strait is flanked by Yemen on one side and Djibouti and Eritrea on the other. This puts it right next to one of the most unstable regions on the planet. The danger is no longer the rocks, but the rockets. For centuries, empires have understood its importance. The British controlled it from the port of Aden, the Ottomans before them. Controlling this strait has always meant having influence over the flow of goods, wealth, and military power between East and West. But never before has that control been weaponized in a way that so directly threatens the delicate, just-in-time global economy we all depend on. This crisis isn't about empires trying to control trade. It's about a non-state actor showing that it has the power to disrupt it for everyone. So, what's the big deal for Europe? To put it simply, the Bab el Mandeb is Europe's main economic artery. A sudden blockage isn't just a minor headache, it's a continental-scale coronary event. Let's start with energy. While not a majority, a crucial portion of Europe's energy imports arrive via the Red Sea. About 10% of its seaborne oil and around 8% of its LNG came through this route before the crisis. If that gate slams shut, the supply line is instantly severed. The immediate effect would be a vicious spike in energy prices, triggering inflation. But it would get worse fast. Without a steady flow, Europe could face energy rationing, forcing industries to cut production and asking citizens to turn down the heat. But the energy shock is only half the story. Europe is a continent of trade. It thrives by importing components and raw materials, turning them into high-value goods, and shipping them out. Roughly 20 to 30% of all trade between Asia and Europe passes through the Suez Canal, and therefore the Bab el Mandeb. German cars, Italian machinery, French luxury goods, their journey to rich Asian markets starts right here. Modern manufacturing, especially in Europe, is built on a just-in-time model. Car factories don't keep massive warehouses full of parts. They rely on a constant, predictable stream of components arriving exactly when needed. The recent crisis has already given us a taste of what happens when that stream is disrupted. Auto plants in Europe were forced to halt production because of delayed parts from Asia. Now imagine that disruption isn't just a delay, but a complete indefinite stoppage. The just-in-time system would crumble in weeks, leading to widespread factory shutdowns and layoffs. Of course, there is another way, sailing all the way around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. But this is a painful and expensive alternative. The journey adds 10 to 14 days of travel, an extra 6,500 kilometers, and jacks up fuel costs by at least 35%. While that sounds like a problem for shipping companies, those costs get passed straight to consumers. Higher shipping costs means higher prices for everything, from electronics to clothes to food. The numbers from the crisis that began in late 2023 paint a stark picture. At the peak of the attacks, traffic through the Suez Canal plunged by 50% or more. Meanwhile, the number of ships taking the long way around Africa nearly doubled. This isn't a theoretical problem, it's a proven fragility that has already cost the global economy billions and hit Europe the hardest. To understand how we got here, you have to know the cast of characters who have turned this vital waterway into a war zone. First up, at the center of it all, the Houthi rebels, officially known as Ansar Allah. Emerging from northern Yemen, the Houthis have been locked in a brutal civil war against a Saudi-led coalition for years. By late 2023, they controlled a huge stretch of Yemen's Red Sea coast. This gave them a prime position overlooking the Bab el Mandeb. In November 2023, claiming solidarity with Hamas in the Gaza conflict, the Houthis started attacking commercial ships. At first, they said they were only targeting ships with ties to Israel, but their aim soon widened, creating chaos for all international shipping. Since then, they have been responsible for over 190 attacks, using a scary arsenal of anti-ship missiles, drones, and unmanned boats. Behind the Houthis, many analysts point the finger at Iran. Tehran has long supported the Houthi movement as part of a bigger strategy to challenge its rivals, namely Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States. For Iran, the Houthis are a powerful proxy. By giving them weapons and intelligence, Iran can squeeze a global chokepoint without a direct fight. It gives them leverage, letting them disrupt the global economy and tie up Western navies at a low cost to themselves. It's the same playbook they used when threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz. The other regional powers, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are in a tricky spot. For years, they led the military campaign against the Houthis. They have a huge interest in keeping ships sailing freely, since their own economies depend on it. But the Houthi attacks have also shown the limits of their military power, forcing them into a delicate diplomatic dance. Then you have the small nation of Djibouti, right on the African side of the strait. It has turned its strategic location into a unique business model, a military-based supermarket. Djibouti hosts bases for the United States, China, France, Italy, and Japan. It's the stable anchor in a sea of chaos, a launchpad for international operations, and a key listening post for everything that moves through the strait. Finally, there are the Western powers, mainly in the US and the EU. Attacks prompted a swift military response. Their interest is simple: freedom of navigation. The economic shockwaves from the Houthi attacks prompted a swift military response, operations that have become a constant, high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Naval destroyers try to shoot down incoming Houthi missiles and drones, a task that is both incredibly difficult and expensive. And this is where the story becomes even more dangerous, because understanding who is involved is only the beginning. The real question is what happens when their strategies collide, and how close the world has already come to a catastrophe. Keep watching. The crisis doesn't end here. It escalates. It all kicked off in November 2023, when Houthi forces staged a dramatic helicopter raid to hijack the cargo ship Galaxy Leader. This wasn't old-school piracy for ransom. It was a political act meant to send a message. What followed was a rapid escalation. Drones and missiles began targeting ships, causing explosions and damage. The reaction from the multi-trillion-dollar shipping industry was swift and decisive. Get out. Major carriers like the Maersk, CMA, CGM, and others announced they were immediately rerouting all their ships away from the Red Sea and around Africa. They weren't willing to risk their multi-billion-dollar ships and the lives of their crews. This wasn't a small adjustment, it was a massive, system-wide recalibration of global trade, and it happened almost overnight. The economic fallout was immediate. Shipping costs went through the roof. The spot rate for a container from China to Europe, which might have been a couple of $1,000s, suddenly surged by over 250%, with some routes seeing even higher spikes. War risk insurance premiums for any vessel that dared to enter the Red Sea exploded. These costs were a direct tax on global trade, felt most sharply in Europe. In response, the international community mobilized. In December 2023, the US announced Operation Prosperity Guardian, a coalition of over 20 nations to guard the waterway. The EU, wanting its own command, launched Operation Aspides in February 2024 for defensive protection. This has led to a strange and crowded sea, where Western warships hunt for incoming threats, while just over the horizon, the Houthis keep launching attacks. US and the UK forces also began hitting Houthi targets inside Yemen, trying to damage their ability to keep up the assault. A major but quieter victim of this crisis has been Egypt. The Suez Canal is a high source of income for the Egyptian government. With traffic plunging, Egypt saw its canal revenues collapse by billions of dollars, making its existing economic problems even worse. The situation entered a new, fragile phase in late 2025. Following a leadership change and under pressure from airstrikes and diplomacy, the Houthis announced a suspension of attacks in November 2025. This has brought some cautious optimism. A few shipping lines have started trial runs back through the Suez Canal. However, analysts and insurers are still on the edge. The pause is seen as conditional and could be reversed at any moment. The Houthis still have their weapons, and the political conflicts that started all this are far from over. Trust, once broken, is hard to fix. Many shipping companies are likely to stick to the longer, safer route around Africa, accepting it as the new, more expensive normal. So far, we've seen a severe disruption, but what could happen in a doomsday scenario, a complete and sustained closure of the Bab el Mandeb? This isn't about ships being rerouted. This is about nothing getting through at all. How could this happen? A bad actor could use naval mines to make the strait impassable. They could sink a large ship in a narrow part of the channel, physically blocking it, or the attacks could become so intense that not even military-escorted convoys would risk it. In this scenario, the phrase "stops Europe overnight" goes from a dramatic title to a literal description. The first 24 hours would bring chaos to energy markets. With a critical portion of Europe's oil and LNG supply cut off, global prices wouldn't just spike, they'd go vertical. Governments would immediately trigger emergency plans, likely involving fueling rationing for the public and telling non-essential industries to power down. Within the first week, the manufacturing model would start to shatter. Major industries like automotive and electronics would run out of key components. Production lines would grind to a halt. Unlike the temporary stoppages we've seen, these would be indefinite. Companies would have no idea when their supply chains might be restored. That means mass layoffs, sending shockwaves through the European job market. Within a month, you'd see it on store shelves. Europe relies on this route for a huge array of consumer goods and even food. Initial stocks might soften the blow, but shortages would quickly become common. The combination of scarcity and the insane cost of air freight for essential items would drive inflation to levels not seen in generations. This economic collapse would almost certainly trigger severe political and social unrest. Governments would face enormous pressure from a public dealing with job losses, a soaring cost of living, and shortages of basic goods. The crisis would become a single focus of every European leader, straining alliances and testing the very fabric of the European Union. This doomsday scenario reveals the fundamental fragility of our globalized world. It shows how a relatively small group, armed with modern weapons in one narrow stretch of water, can hold an entire continent of nearly 450 million people hostage. The Gate of Tears would live up to its name, marking the grief of a global economy grinding to a halt. The Bab el Mandeb Strait is way more than just a line on a map. It's a vital artery, a geopolitical flashpoint and a stark reminder of the hidden weaknesses in our modern world. The crisis that erupted there has been a global stress test, showing us just how quickly the elegant dance of global trade can be thrown into chaos. While the recent pause in attacks offers a fragile moment of relief, the underlying dangers haven't gone anywhere. The weapons are still there. The political tensions are still simmering. The strategic power this tiny choke point offers is now clear to everyone. Europe and the world have been forced to confront a hard truth. Their economic security is balanced precariously on the free passage of ships through an 18-mile-wide gate, thousands of miles away. And that's the real lesson of the Bab el Mandeb. The world isn't held together by peace or diplomacy, but by narrow corridors of water that can break everything in a single night. The map looks calm. Reality isn't. If you want to understand just how fragile this world really is, don't stop here. The next choke point is even more dangerous. Tap the video on your screen about the Strait of Malacca, the corridor that keeps Asia alive. And make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive. This is Empire Secrets. Your desire, your empire.